Inside Out. How are y'all doing? Hey, it is great to be with you guys. My name is Jeremy. I'm a small group leader here at Inside Out with the senior guys. Where are you guys at? Yeah, this year's our year, guys. This year's our year. Anyways, hey, I'm excited to be here. We are in part 3 of Out of the Shallows, and throughout this series, we've been talking about faith as a whole. We've been talking about regardless of what you're coming in with, if you're coming in and you say, hey, I've been in church my whole life, or if you say, hey, I've been a follower of Jesus for a while, or if you're like, I'm not even sure if I believe in God, regardless of where you're at, what we started with in this series is that we all have something in us that desires a deeper experience or a deeper faith with God or a deeper understanding of God. And that's what we're talking about in this series. And to get us started to where we're going today, I want to tell you a little bit about something for me later on that is the greatest catalyst for me in my faith to experience a deeper understanding of God. But to get us started, I have a question for you, just by a quick show of hands. Who in here has a fear or somewhat of a fear when it comes to flying on airplanes? I see a couple hands that were like this, like you guys don't want to admit it. Yeah, well, for me, I got to be honest, guys. For me, I have a little bit of a fear when it comes to planes. And it's small enough to where it's not like I don't want to fly because of it, but it's where, I get a little bit worried when I do. And I don't really get concerned when I go somewhere, but when I come back and I think about all the things that I'm coming back to my dogs, my bed, my wife, like all of those things coming back, I'm like, oh, I don't want anything to happen, and I get a little bit concerned. And so what happens to me is I'm on a plane ride back usually, and I'll feel like a little bump, and my mind just instantly goes to like the worst case scenario. Like the engine just went out, and we're going down, it's lost part 2, like it's not going to be good. Or maybe, for me, I'll hear the pilot, I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but I'll hear the pilot come over the intercom, and he'll say, flight attendants, go ahead and take a seat. And I'm like, why? Like, why do they need to take a seat, And then he's like, it's going to be a little bit bumpy. And I'm like, how does that make sense? Like, how is the air bumpy? Like, what's about to happen? And when these kind of things happen and I'm coming back from a trip, usually my palms start to sweat a little bit. I start to get a little bit worried. I look up and down the aisle a bunch of times as if there's going to be something there. And I begin to grip the armrest. And what's funny is when I fly with my wife somewhere and we're headed back, usually I look over at her when this is all happening, and she's like jamming to Post Malone doing a freaking coloring book. Like, no joke. Like, she does coloring books, and while I'm freaking out, she's doing a coloring book. And the plane could be going down, and she wouldn't care at all. And that's just who she is. But for me, as I was thinking about it this week, I actually discovered that the fear of flying is pretty irrational. Here's why, is because there are some statistics that are pretty staggering in terms of the probability of us getting in a plane crash. And the first is this, is that you are more likely to win an Olympic gold medal than to get in a plane crash. Let that sink in for a second. You're more likely to win an Olympic gold medal. Or perhaps this one, you're more likely to be born with an extra finger or toe than you are to get in a plane crash. Like, that's pretty crazy to me. I don't know if any of you have extra fingers or toes, but that's pretty crazy to me. And this last one I'm not so sure about. It's on the internet, so I guess it's true. But this one is, you're more likely to become the president of the United States than to get in a plane crash. Which, I don't know if that's true, but that means that getting in a plane crash is pretty rare. But for me, I just don't like being up that high. And then one day, about a year ago, I got a text from my brother. And the text said, hey, Jeremy, do you want to go skydiving with me? And I thought, I opened my phone, read the text message, read it again, locked it, and put it back in my pocket. And I said, no, there's no way I'm doing that. And I just ignored him. And then he asked again, and he asked again, and he asked again. And finally, I was like, okay, fine. But in my mind, I thought, I don't have the money, I don't have the time to do something like that. And then he said, hey, how does Saturday work for you? And I was like, well, okay, what do you mean, how does Saturday? And he's like, well, actually, I just sold my laptop on Craigslist. This is what he told me. He said, I just sold my laptop on Craigslist, and coincidentally, the guy I sold it to is a skydiving instructor, and he gave me 2 free passes. And I was like, how does that even happen? And it's like, I asked Ashley, am I free? And she's like, yeah, you're free, you can go. And that wasn't helpful at all, and so I said, okay, I guess there's no way I'm getting out of this. So I said, yes, I'll go skydiving with you. And so I meet up with him. We drive about an hour outside of town. And we get to this place, and we roll up to this place, and it's basically a field. Like, there's no runway or anything. It's just a field, a warehouse, And then there's this little tiny plane next to the warehouse that looks something like that. And I was like, I had the same reaction you did. I was like, okay, this is not good. But I was there. My brother wasn't going to let me not do it. And so I go into the warehouse. I meet the guy that I'm going to be like tethered to jumping out of this plane. And he looks at me and he says, hey, man, don't worry. Like, I've done this 8,000 times. To which I go, okay, that's not helpful at all, because statistically, the 8,001th time, the chute is not going to pull. And so I'm freaking out even more at this point. But I'm there. We're going for it. We can only go one at a time, so I went first before my brother. And we get in this plane. I swear to you, this plane felt like it was made of cardboard, like the way it shook when it was going along this field to take off. And we're going up, and we hit about 5,000 feet, and I'm beginning to shake. My palms are getting pretty sweaty, just like it does on an airplane. And the pilot turns around, and he says, hey, man, if this plane goes down, don't worry, you got a parachute, bro. And I'm like, okay, that's not helpful at all, but thanks for that. And then we get up to 10,000 feet, which is where you jump from. And the guy who is with me, he turns to me, and he says, you're about to jump out of a perfectly good plane. And the look that kind of describes the way I felt is actually a picture of me in that plane at that moment. It's about how I felt in that moment. I was like, dear God, all the flare prayers were going up at this moment. And the guy said, you're about to jump out of a perfectly good plane. And then he pulls the side door open. And then what I want to show you guys, since I didn't know if I was going to make it, I went ahead and purchased the video that comes with it. So basically the guy has a GoPro on his hand the whole time. And so I want to show you the jumping moment. They put it to the background of Jump by Van Halen, so there's a little bit of music to it. But I want to show you guys what happened. Take a look at this. So that's it. That was jumping out. I obviously made it, but the thing that describes the way I felt the entire time is this picture about 30 seconds later. And that really describes the way I felt. I don't even know what this is. I think I'm just trying to be cool or adventurous. And then my eyes closed, yelling at the top of my lungs. That about described the way I felt. But we ended up landing on the ground, and my first thought when I hit the ground was, I think I'm going to throw up. And then my second thought was, that was awesome. That was so cool. Leading up to it, that part was terrible. I had so much fear, but the actual thing, that was awesome. I loved it. And that whole experience, my whole point sharing that story is just because there's something in life that I think we all intuitively know or we discover throughout life, and it's this, is that negative experiences can sometimes produce a positive outcome. It was a negative experience leading up to actually landing on the ground and knowing I was safe. It was pretty dang scary. It was not a positive experience. But landing, the outcome was this memory that I now have, the story I get to share, this thing that I get to talk about with my brother, and it was a positive outcome. Negative experiences, if they're uncomfortable, they're painful, whatever it might be, can sometimes produce a positive outcome. But if you were to ask me, when my feet were dangling, my short little legs are just dangling over 10,000 feet of open air, if you were to ask me, is this a positive experience? I would most likely 100% say, no, it is not. Why? Well, because in the midst of a negative experience, it is often difficult to see any possibility of a positive outcome. When we're in the thick of it, when there's kind of a fog around us and there's all this emotion, all this feeling, it is so difficult for us to imagine on the other side there being something good, there being a positive outcome. Raise your hand in here if you are a runner. Anybody a runner? Anybody like to run? I got to be honest with you guys. I don't understand you guys at all if you like running. Running is not my thing. These short little legs can only go so fast in my life. But running's not my thing, and there's a thought that hits my brain every single time I go running, and it's not very often. I know the health benefits. I know how it helps my heart, my lungs, and all that stuff, but every time I'm running, I just think, when do I get to stop running? When can I no longer have to run anymore? That's what I think every time I run. I can't see the positive outcome in the midst of the negative experience that I go through. And here's my point with all of this and all of those stories and everything. Here's my point. We are all going to experience something negative in life. And I'm not talking about like skydiving negative. I'm not talking about like running negative. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. These are like the deeper reality things of life that we experience. Throughout life, things don't necessarily go our way at times, and things don't turn out the way we expected, and we perhaps could experience something negative. Perhaps it is uncomfortable. Maybe this negative thing is uncomfortable. We ended up in a school. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. We ended up in a city. We ended up with a new stepmom or a stepdad. And it was uncomfortable for us. And because of that, maybe there's conflict. Maybe there's conflict between you and your parents. Maybe there's conflict between both of your parents, between you and a friend or you and a significant other. And oftentimes this conflict can leave us with something that was unexpected. We could say to ourselves, I never thought it would go this way. I never thought it would turn out like this. I never thought they would hurt me like that. I never thought I would lose somebody who was close to me. And it's unexpected. And then we are just left with a whole pile of pain and hurt. When we go through negative things in life and it's unexpected and it hurts and there's conflict, oftentimes we're left with pain and hurt, and we're left feeling like, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to put a foot forward. And so what do we do when we feel that? Well, most of the time we feel compelled to do something. We feel compelled to do something. We just have to go. We can't sit still. We got to go. We got to move. We got to fill it up. We just have to do something. And very quickly, that something can become an anything. Anything that fills that hole in us. Things that we never considered doing before, but all of a sudden we are open to a relationship that's maybe damaging, a habit, that thing that is unhealthy for us, and we know it, but it fills the void temporarily inside of us. We result to an anything in our life. And in the midst of this, our faith begins to kind of intersect with this negative situation. We're talking about faith throughout this series. And in the midst of this negative situation, our faith intersects. And do you know what we do most of the time, myself included? We tend to turn our back on God. And we turn our back on our faith, and we walk in the other direction. And then somewhere down the road, somebody says to us, hey, you just need to have more faith. And we're like, really? Faith? Faith? I don't know how to have faith because I have lost all faith. We all experience something negative, and perhaps at some point it intersects with our faith, and that's what I want to talk about today. What do we do when that happens? How do we not run from God, but how do we perhaps run towards Him when this happens in life, regardless of what is going on? And the reason I think this is so important to talk about when it comes to discussing how we actually grow in our faith is because I think there's an opportunity when something comes our way that we cannot run away, we can run towards, and we can actually grow and discover a deeper relationship with God as a result. But it requires us to shift our perspective. It requires us to see things differently. And there's a guy 2,000 years ago who saw things differently, and his name was James. And he was the brother of Jesus. And this is a pretty big deal. This really is an important thing to talk about with James, that he was the brother of Jesus, because throughout Jesus' entire life, James thought he was crazy. James and his family thought that Jesus was crazy. It wasn't until James died, Jesus died, that James actually turned in a different direction because he saw his brother come back to life. Something changed his perspective. He actually changed direction and became a follower of Jesus. And becoming a follower of Jesus in the first century was not a good thing because you were ridiculed, you were mocked, you were beaten. And James, at the end of his life, he was actually stoned to death because of what he thought about his brother, that he thought his brother was God. And that's what Christians experienced in the first century. But during James's life, he writes this letter to the church, and he writes about these negative situations that we all experience, and he writes about what we can do when it comes to our faith in these situations. And here's what he says. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. Consider it pure joy. You should be happy. Whenever you face trials of many kinds. To which we go, okay, James, pause, hang on. You're saying you want us to be happy when things go bad. James, that doesn't make any sense. And when I hear this, I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and so I can't help think of this scene from Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, where Ron says this. I think this is our reaction to James when we read this. Here's what Ron says. Look at this.
You're going to suffer, but you're going to be happy about it.
I don't know if you guys are big Harry Potter fans. I am, but when I see that, that's exactly the reaction I think we have whenever we read this from James. But then James continues. He tells us why this is. Look at what he says. He says, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. This is so important. The testing of your faith. This word testing isn't really written in the way that we understand it today. It's not like a testing as in like a pass or fail testing. That's not James's point. This word written in the original Greek language that James wrote in actually means something more like refining. Refining isn't like refining gold. When gold is refined, what happens is there's a chemical that's introduced into the substance and it gets rid of all the impurities. So what you're left with is a much more pure and bold and stronger gold as an end result. And James says that when it comes to our faith, when it comes to the testing of your faith, it's a refining that happens. When we go through something negative in life, there's this refining thing that happens and it produces perseverance. It makes us stronger as a result of it. It makes us understand and have a deeper relationship with God as an end result. So we go, okay, well, how does that happen? And James goes on to describe this perseverance. He says, let perseverance finish its work. Finish its work. That's so important. It's an action-oriented thing. Let perseverance finish its work, meaning lean into what is happening. Invite God into it. Step towards whatever is uncomfortable, whatever trial it is, step towards it. Let it finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, so that you may discover something deeper, more meaningful in your life and your faith, not lacking anything, a peace that comes from your heavenly Father. And so in this short sentence, James essentially says that, our faith, when it intersects with something negative that's going on in our life, that we have an opportunity for our faith, our understanding of God to be refined, to be stronger. But it's only if we choose to lean in, not run away, not go to other things, but lean into God, invite him in, step out into something that's a little bit unknown or painful, and invite God into it. In other words, James's point is this, and this is our bottom line for tonight. If you want an out of the shallows faith, you have to be willing to step out into the deep, the unknown, uncomfortable, unexpected, and even painful parts of life. James says that you actually end up stronger. Your faith is refined if you choose to step out into that which makes you uncomfortable, that which is unknown, where you don't know what's going to happen, and that which is painful in life. And I realize when I say this, there are probably a couple of things that come to mind. And the reason is because we're all at different places. You have all experienced different amounts of negative things in your life, different amounts of uncomfortability or pain in your life. And so because of that, I just want to talk to a couple different specific groups of people. If you're in here, perhaps you would say, Jeremy, my faith, I don't have anything external that's going on. I just have something internal that I feel like is keeping me from stepping out into a deeper waters, from understanding what that deeper faith looks like. Maybe that's you in here, and you would say it's a fear, or it's an insecurity, it's a habit, it's this emotional thing. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's depression, and maybe you would say something like this: if only I could get past blank. Whatever it is for you, if only I could get past blank, then I can grow in my faith. To which, if that's you and you say something like that, I just want you to know that you are already growing in your faith in a way that you can't even see. Because the fact that you would say something like that means that you are discontent with where you currently are, and that you're already growing closer to God because you want something better. And I want you to know that you can fill in the blank like this, that whatever it is, it doesn't pull us away from God, but it points us towards him. Whatever it might be, fear, insecurity, anxiety, depression, whatever that might be, that doesn't mean that you're not growing. That means that if you bring that to him, you can grow in a way that you didn't think possible. And the other group of people I want to talk to are those of you in here who would push back on me. Those of you in here who would say, Jeremy, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know the pain, the conflict, the struggles that I've experienced in my life. And I just want you to know you are absolutely right. I don't know what you've been through, and I don't want to sit up here and pretend that I do, and I never, ever would want to minimize anything that you've experienced in your life. But my hope and my prayer for you would be this, is that whatever it is, that you would not run away from God, but that you would perhaps turn towards him and take a big, bold step. And in turning towards him and inviting him in, that you would discover that he is a comfort, he is a joy, he is a peace that is better than anything else you can experience in your life. And my hope for you, I think that when we go through painful things, we sometimes find ourselves in a season where we don't really know what to do. It's like right in the thick of it. We don't know what to do. There's nothing that we can do but try to wake up the next day. And if that's you, I just want to say that's totally okay to be there. There's always a time of processing. My hope is that when you go outside of that time of processing, that you can begin to invite God in a way you never have, step out into the deep, and begin to experience a deeper faith in your life. To wrap up, I mentioned to you guys at the beginning that this has been one of the greatest catalysts for me in my life when it comes to my faith. And I want to tell you why. And to do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the year 2016 for me. In 2016, I started off having a great year. I came on staff at North Point, which was my dream job. Working here is my dream job. And then about a month after that, in March, I got married to my best friend. And then 2 months later, I graduated from the greatest university on the planet, University of Texas at Austin. This year's our year, everybody. This year's our year. So a lot of great things happened. It was a great start to a year. And then a couple months later, things took a turn. I want to introduce you to my dad. This is me and my dad. This is the day I got married. And my dad growing up, he had a problem with alcohol. And, growing up, I didn't really know it that much. I didn't really see it. But when I got into high school, I began to see this much more clearly. And things became very normal for me. It was normal for me to come home and be able to spot across the room when my dad had been drinking. I didn't even need to smell his breath. I didn't even need to see his eyes. I could just see in the way he looked at me that he was drinking. And I would immediately go to my room, shut my door, and stay there the rest of the night. It became normal for me to get a call from my mom crying that I needed to go pick up my dad on the side of the road somewhere because he passed out when he was trying to drive home from the bar. It became normal for me to have to get a call from my mom that said, hey, your dad did this, or your dad did this again. Your dad's in jail this time. And so when I graduated high school, I went to college, and I thought, man, I'm living my life. My dad's still here. I'm not that far, but I'm kind of doing my own thing. And things just kind of deteriorated from there. Because then it became calls about, well, now your dad found some pills, and now your dad tried to take his own life last night. And this is what I experienced in the calls that I got while I was in college. And then 2016 rolls around. All these good things are happening. And then after I graduate from college, a couple months later, my dad sits down with me, and he says, son, I think I'm done being a dad. I think I'm done. I think your life looks pretty good on the outside. I think I'm going to go off and do my own thing. Your mom and I are done. We've been done for a while. Who's kidding? I'm going to go off and live my own life now. I've put in my time. And then he took off, and he left, and he went north. And for the next couple of months, he decided he was going to do that, so I decided, okay, well, I'm done with him then as well. And every now and then he would reach out and text and say, how's it going, even though he said he was leaving, and I would just ignore him, or I would say, I don't want to talk to you. And then he'd reply back with something that said, well, you're not my son anymore then. You don't belong to me anymore then. You're so selfish, Jeremy. And this is what the kind of things he would say to me. And then about 6 months went by, and I discovered that he was coming back. Wherever he was coming back. And my mom, I thought she was just ignorantly hopeful. She said, he's coming back, and he went to rehab, and he's healthy now. And him and I are going to try to work things out because they never officially got a divorce. And he said, he was coming back, and he reached out to me, and he said, hey, I'm trying to mend things with your mom. and I want to try to mend things with you too. And I was kind of at a crossroads in my life, in my faith, in my relationships, because I realized that I had a choice on whether or not I could fight for that relationship. And I had a couple of mentors and friends in my life that said, hey, I think you should go for it. I think you should meet with him. And so my dad reached out, and I said, okay, I want to meet with you. And we met over at this Panera Bread, literally right here at 1890 Ranch. And I got to say, it was one of the most uncomfortable, painful, weird, awkward conversations I've ever had in my life. And there were a lot of hurtful things said from both of us. There were a lot of tears shed from both of us, and it didn't even really end that well. But what happened is it was a first step. It was a first step for my dad to truly get healthy and get better in life, and it was a first step in our relationship. And from there, things kind of progressed and got better over time. And that was about 3 years ago now, about 3.5 years ago. And now I can say without a doubt that I have one of the strongest relationships with my dad that I've ever had. It's not perfect by any means. And my dad still does a lot of stupid stuff, and he says things, and I just call him out on it, and it's not always great. But what I've discovered through going through this, it's one of the most painful things of my life I've been through, having to look my dad in the eye and begin to say, hey, God, I don't want to trust this guy. I don't want to have a relationship with him, but I'm going to fight for this. And to step out into those waters, whatever it might be, is uncomfortable and painful. What I discovered is a faith that I didn't know was possible. See, somebody had told me that God forgave me, even when I turned my back on him, but I didn't really know what that meant until I'd had somebody close to me turn their back on me, and I was called to forgive them. People say God loves you all the time, and it kind of just bounces off of us. For me, I didn't really understand what that meant until I was told to love somebody that had hurt me immensely. And through this entire time, I grew in my faith in a way that I didn't even think was possible. And that's my story, and it is far from perfect, like I said. It is still very broken, and my dad and I are both broken, and we have a lot to learn and a lot to work through. But that's me. That's my story, and really quick, I just want to turn it around to you and ask you, in your life, what is that situation? What is that thing? Have you experienced something like that where you have felt like you wanted to run from God instead of running towards him? What is that for you? And what is that thing that you want to run towards instead of running towards God? And what does it look like for you to perhaps step out into what is uncomfortable, unknown, unexpected, and perhaps painful, to begin to invite God in, lean into him, let your faith be refined, and begin to discover a faith that you didn't know was possible for you? It's my hope and my prayer for each of you in here. We're going to talk about it more in small groups, but before that, would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we come to you because we know that you are good. You are good to us. God, I love the fact that regardless of what's going on in life, that you are a rock, you are a firm foundation, you are an anchor for us. No matter what we go through, God, thank you that your love is always there, no matter what we step out into, whatever we face, whatever we choose not to hide from and walk towards because we know that you're with us. Would you meet us there in those moments of pain, in those moments of the unknown, conflict? God, would you meet us in those moments, and would you help us discover you in a way like we never have, and discover a faith that we never thought was possible? God, thank you for your love, your grace, your son Jesus. We pray all this in his name. Amen.